We read The Blue Sweater, Bridging the Gap Between Rich and Poor in an Interconnected World by Jacqueline Novogratz. We're going to talk about her leadership qualities in the context of her work. She was an important leader because she had many successes in diverse contexts. So she had this adaptability that allowed her to be a leader in many, many places all over the world. An overview of her accomplishments include that she started at Chase Manhattan Bank, where she was reviewing international loans. This was in her early 20s. And quickly she realized that she wanted to work more on the ground and more internationally. So she started working for the African Development Bank, where she was the ambassador to African women, and she ended up moving to Côte d'Ivoire. After some hardships, which we'll talk about, she ended up co-founding Duterembere, which is a microfinance group for African women. They lent money to women at a very low interest rate and helped them build skills and connect with other women, and this gave them a chance to participate in the formal economy and experience success, which was something they had been struggling with prior. After Duterembere established itself, she went on to work with the Blue Bakery. So women were trying to sell baked goods, but were having trouble actually being financially sustainable, and she helped that business take off. And then eventually went on to consult for the World Bank, where she reviewed soft loan packages for Gambia's Department of Agriculture. Then she moved back to the States and founded a philanthropy workshop at the Rockefeller Foundation, which segued into developing the Acumen Fund, which the purpose of the Acumen Fund was to guide philanthropists' investment in small businesses. So we want to talk about her power and authority and how she used it. So she was a white woman with a financial background, which accounted for a lot, particularly as she was working in Africa with financial organizations. That said, her whiteness and young age also made her credibility questionable sometimes. But I would say her endless dedication seemed to increase her legitimacy. So she persevered over and over again and gained power through this perseverance and through successful projects. And as she made a reputation for herself, outside organizations would reach out to her and ask her for her expertise and assistance. Privilege also played a role in her success. So she was able to attend prestigious, well-connected colleges like Stanford Business School. So she had a lot of admirable leadership qualities, which we've extracted from our reading of the book, and also she really highlighted throughout her telling of her work. So I'm going to go through these not in any particular order, but she had optimism and resilience. So she was enthusiastic, charismatic, and personable. She was convinced that attitude had just as much to do with success as skill. This reminds me a little bit of the emotional intelligence that we've talked about in class. Compassion, not criticism. She never started helping with criticism. Instead, she showed people that she cared and focused on a shared mission. So rapport building and that team mentality was really important to her. Her financial knowledge, of course, was a really admirable quality given the context of her work. She was determined and organized, so these qualities helped her maintain momentum and keep the process orderly when there were many, many moving parts. She started out by using her natural talents, which largely was working hard, so this prevented her from complete overwhelm and gave her ground to stand on with so much that was new and overwhelming. She talked about the importance of self-awareness and how she had to know herself better first before being able to help others. She acknowledged failure and became comfortable living with and accepting inconsistencies. So an example of inconsistency was that she was regularly faced with the contrast of privilege and poverty, her own privilege and the poverty of those she worked with. She also talked about how everyone has angels and monsters within them, so an inner inconsistency, but she aimed to cultivate the angels. So she realized that there would inevitably be failures and corruption, but that there was also the potential for positivity and success amidst it all. Power and compassion must happen together was something that she talked about. So she embodied this inner strength and an external gentleness. She talked about being a bird on the inside or a bird on the outside and a tiger within. So power and compassion shouldn't happen separately. She had patience and accountability, so she believed it was important to bring people along with her through the process. And a part of this was letting young people lead. She set clear expectations, so everyone had to be all in for the project to succeed. And she felt that by communicating clearly, this was more possible. She was unafraid to seek and speak the truth. And another piece of her communication style was deep listening and empathy. So she talked about how listening is an act of empathy and requires a lot of patience, but it's also essential to understanding how others think and understanding what they hope for.
Many of Jacqueline's values had a great influence on the decisions that she made and the accomplishments that were achieved throughout her work, both domestically and internationally. They were highlighted throughout the book, and we have some here. The first one is interconnectedness. She really believed that we are all part of a global community. Community and trust are huge. She cared about people and believed in their successes, and this really impacted her determination to work towards and through all of the projects that she had and all of the challenges that she was faced with. She knew that she had to be true to herself, and she stated that only by knowing yourself can you know others. She was very dedicated and determined. She knew that you have to want to make a difference more than you want to be loved, and sometimes that meant making unfavorable decisions around others. She really believed in local leadership. She looked for role models and those with the most at stake. And she stated that we're not handing out gifts. We're finding the gifts within each person. She really had a strong desire to put people in leadership positions to create sustainability. Collaboration and adaptability. She was very dedicated to working alongside the communities that she lived in and adapting to the resources that were available to them, as opposed to bringing in quote unquote Western resources and ideals into these other communities and cultures. Belonging and accountability. She worked really hard to not create dependence and knew that people needed to feel responsible for one another and the work that they were doing. She believed in self-sufficiency and empowerment and felt that fed dignity. She stated that money is freedom and confidence and choice is dignity. She believed that everyone deserves respect, that social change requires both insider and outsider involvement, and that language is essential. And that it affects assumptions. At her work with Acumen, she chose to call donors investors and believed that this term would help create more of a emotional investment in these projects that they were financially funding. All of these values had many results towards the decisions and accomplishments that she made. The first one is education and decision-making power. She educated people on possible paths forward and included them in the decision-making process. She didn't leave anybody in the dark and was really transparent with many of her decisions. Commitment and communication. People were eager to engage and felt comfortable voicing their own visions, options, and concerns when working on projects with her. And sustainability. These qualities allowed her to launch projects, leave them, and have them last. As a result, she didn't dedicate her life to just one project, but instead many. Much knowledge and skills were acquired throughout her work in various sectors. She had exceptional financial knowledge, which helped her make businesses break even and start up businesses and make sure that they would be sustainable once she left them. Despite having these skills, she wasn't always the most knowledgeable or graceful in applying these talents. For example, Chase Bank and Rwanda were very different settings. But she dealt with this difference by maintaining balance and humility, curiosity, and confidence as she did her work with in new places with new people. She combined her intellect and her compassion and believed that it takes both intellect and compassion to have wisdom. She viewed locals as experts on specific projects, so she went in with general knowledge but allowed herself to be directed by specifics by those that she was working with. For example, when she was working in a community, she, instead of convincing community members to switch to glass or plastic water pitchers, which could be sanitized easier and mitigate infection and diseases, she created a way to sanitize the clay pitchers that they already preferred. So she was being very adaptable and adapted to the preferences of the communities that she was working with. She built teamwork and camaraderie. Each time she started a new project, she had a new team, and they were almost always a different culture than her own. And she wasn't in denial about those cultural differences. Instead, she allowed herself to be corrected along the way, which enhanced her ability to grow and connect with people in the long run. She had really strong rapport building. She laughed and joked and wasn't all business all of the time. She gave people ownership of the process early on and established that she was there to support but not run the show. She understood that her successes and accomplishments were measured only by the success and accomplishments of those that she was working with, and she focused on building competency and starting small. In her work with Acumen, she traveled with funders to the places that would be impacted, and with the hopes that this would give funders a more personal investment and understanding of what they were financially funding.
Jacqueline made many good decisions throughout her work in this field, but we've categorized all of those good decisions in the realm of time and perseverance. So she chose to stick with projects even when they seemed impossible. She put in the time, and by staying with it over the years, she grew immensely on a personal level and successfully launched many patient capital and microfinance projects. A prime example of this dedication is that she almost gave up in the first year after being poisoned by some women that didn't appreciate having an outsider aiding their projects and questioning their work. She almost quit, but in the end, she decided to take that as an opportunity to challenge her way of operating and to grow. She was also offered a much higher paying job later in her career when she was starting the Acumen Fund, and she resisted that temptation, and it ultimately paid off because the Acumen Fund ended up becoming an incredibly successful organization. There were also many challenges and setbacks in her process, and we came up with a couple examples using the Blue Bakery. So that was one of the projects she engaged in early in her work. The first mistake was, after a bout of food poisoning that many customers experienced, she realized that her push to cut costs had inspired the women to stop replacing the oil in the baked goods. And so this, instead of being this opportunity to scold people, she used it as an educational opportunity on where to cut costs and where to indulge for the sake of quality. Another couple mistakes were that she quickly found out that the workers were stealing baked goods, and that they were also refusing to hustle, so they just weren't selling very many because they weren't pushing the product, which is a very Western way of doing things. The solution was she addressed the thievery head on, so she emphasized the interconnected nature of the consequences for the whole group. And then with the hustling and sales pitch piece of it, she found alternative ways of building the bakery's reputation that didn't require the poor women to hustle and be more vulnerable and forward than their culture permitted. In general, she learned that it was necessary to spend time understanding a culture and a protocol right off the bat so that you weren't having to learn this retroactively. Another lesson was we need to bring all women with us, not run too far ahead of them. And this was something she learned because she's very hyper and energetic, and that she learned that maybe that isn't always helpful, and it can kind of steamroll people, if you will. She also emphasized that the importance of paying attention to what doesn't work, not just what has, and that success and failure go hand in hand. So challenges and setbacks aren't necessarily bad, they're an opportunity for growth. She was exceptional at taking risks and showed a lot of courage. So she was very good at pushing through discomfort. There's Brene Brown in class. We've talked about Brene Brown's work around courage over comfort, and sometimes comfort isn't an option. She didn't give up even when one approach didn't work. And she resisted the concept of charity and moving money out the door even when that's what funders wanted to do. She was convinced and ultimately proved that people had to own projects themselves. If the government owned them and funded them, accountability and dedication was lost. And to conclude, Thrive Missoula is looking for a new ED, and we're trying to decide if she is a good fit, and we've determined that she is, but here's our list of pros and cons. Pros, she's got experience empowering small businesses that lift people out of poverty. She has demonstrated successful leadership in a wide variety of contexts and environments. She's personable and well-versed in connecting with many cultures and agencies. She cultivates collaboration and accountability in those she works with. She's organized and dedicated. She listens and learns well on the job. She's incredibly self-aware, and then her financial competence is quite exceptional. The cons are that she's not accustomed to working exclusively in one community, and so we wonder if her global perspective will shift her focus away from Missoula. And also, we probably can't pay her what she's worth.
Thank you for your patience and willingness to embrace a different format of presentation, and we definitely recognize that some of these can be very hard to sit through. So good luck to all of you on your presentations, and have a great spring break, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Bye.
Bye.